The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Patricia Henderson stood at the front of room 204, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the boy in the back row. The boy with holes in his shoes. The boy whose pants were 2 inches too short. The boy who came to school hungry more days than not. "Class," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "let's hear from Jamal about his big dreams." Laughter rippled through the room like poison. Jamal Williams sat frozen, his worn notebook clutched against his chest. Inside that notebook were plans, drawings, ideas that kept him awake at night with hope. But now, standing before 30 pairs of eyes, he felt something crack inside his 12-year-old heart. I want to build things," he whispered. "I want to be an engineer." The laughter exploded louder. Mrs. Henderson's smile was cruel. "An engineer? Sweetheart, let's be realistic. Kids like you need to focus on simpler goals." 20 years later, Jamal Williams would walk through the doors of Henderson Academy as the new principal. The same school, the same hallways, and yes, the same Mrs. Henderson, now silver-haired and still teaching in room 204. She wouldn't recognize him at first, but he would never forget her. This is a story about the words that break us, the shame that shapes us, and the moment when everything we survived becomes the foundation of everything we become. This is about a boy who refused to stay broken. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Detroit, Michigan, 1998. The city was still bleeding from decades of economic collapse. Factories stood like hollow monuments to better days. Neighborhoods that once thrived now held more empty lots than homes. Jamal Williams lived in one of those neighborhoods. His mother, Diane Williams, worked 3 jobs: morning shift at the hospital cafeteria, afternoon cleaning offices downtown, night shift at a gas station when she could get the hours. His father had left when Jamal was 4, leaving behind nothing but silence and struggle. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms for Jamal, his mother, and his grandmother, Ruth. The heat worked sometimes. The hot water was a luxury they timed like a military operation. Jamal's clothes came from donation bins and hand-me-downs from church families who'd long ago stopped asking if they needed help. They were poor. But Jamal's grandmother made sure he understood something crucial. Poor is what we have, baby, not who we are. She was the one who brought home books from the library, old encyclopedias, magazines about science and buildings and how things worked. When other kids played outside, Jamal sat at the kitchen table taking apart broken radios, studying how circuits connected, imagining structures that could touch the sky. His teachers noticed his mind. Some of them, anyway. Most saw a quiet black boy in donated clothes and assumed the worst. Late because his mother's bus ran behind, he was lazy. Tired because he'd been up worried about the past due rent notice. He wasn't trying hard enough. His notebook filled with architectural sketches instead of neat homework. He was distracted, unfocused, lost. But Mrs. Henderson was different. She wasn't just indifferent. She was cruel. She taught 7th grade math and English, subjects where she held complete power over which students got called on, praised, or humiliated. She had favorites, bright, well-dressed kids from the nicer neighborhoods, kids who showed up with new backpacks and fresh haircuts and parents who volunteered at school events, kids who looked nothing like Jamal. He tried at first to be invisible. Sit in the back. Don't make eye contact. Turn in his work and stay quiet. But invisibility only works until someone decides to see you. And Mrs. Henderson decided to see Jamal the day he made one mistake. He let his hope show. It was career day. Students were asked to share their dreams. Jamal, caught up in the moment, raised his hand. For once, he wanted to be seen for what was inside his head, not what was on his back. He wanted someone to know he was more than his circumstances. But just when he thought maybe, someone would listen, things took a darker turn. The humiliation didn't end in that one moment. It became Mrs. Henderson's favorite game. "Jamal, since you're such a brilliant engineer, why don't you calculate this problem for us?" she'd say, her tone making it clear she expected him to fail. When he got answers right, and he often did, she'd check his work 3 times, suspicious, as if a poor black boy couldn't possibly understand mathematics. When he got answers wrong, she'd sigh dramatically. "See, class? This is what happens when we aim too high too fast. We need to master the basics first." The basics. Always the basics. As if Jamal was somehow behind, despite his grades being solid, despite his test scores rising, despite the fact that when he was given a chance, he excelled. The other students learned from her example. They mocked his clothes, his shoes, the way his grandmother cut his hair at home instead of at a barber shop. They accidentally knocked his books off his desk. They whispered engineer like it was a joke, a fantasy too ridiculous to take seriously. Jamal started eating lunch in the bathroom, started taking longer routes home to avoid groups, started keeping his notebook hidden, his dreams locked away where no one could laugh at them. His grades began to slip, not because he couldn't do the work, but because shame is heavy. When you carry it every day, when it follows you from class to class, when you see it reflected in your teacher's eyes, it crushes the part of you that believes you matter. His mother noticed. "Baby, what's wrong?" Diane asked one night, finding him staring at his homework, tears streaming silent down his face. "I'm stupid, Mama," he whispered. "Mrs. Henderson says kids like me, we can't do big things." The silence that followed was terrible. Diane Williams had fought her whole life, fought poverty, fought for every dollar, fought to keep her son fed and clothed and safe. But this? Someone killing her child's spirit? She showed up at school the next day. Mrs. Henderson met her in the hallway, arms crossed, smile polite but cold. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sure Jamal has been creative in describing our classroom dynamic." "My son came home crying," Diane said quietly, "saying he's too stupid to dream." "I'm preparing him for reality," Mrs. Henderson replied. "False hope helps no one. I've taught in this district for 15 years. I know which children have the support system for advanced paths, and which need more practical guidance." "You mean you know which children are poor?" "I mean I know which children have resources." Diane stood there, in her cafeteria uniform, still smelling like industrial cleaner from her second job. She had no college degree, no lawyer, no power in this building. But she had truth. "My son," she said slowly, "is brilliant. You don't see it because you don't want to see it. You look at his clothes and decide his mind doesn't matter. You look at me and decide our family doesn't matter. But one day, Mrs. Henderson, he's going to be something you can't imagine, and you won't even remember doing this to him." Mrs. Henderson's smile never wavered. "I'm sure you believe that. Have a good day, Mrs. Williams." That meeting changed nothing at school, but it changed everything in Jamal. His mother had fought for him, walked into that building exhausted and afraid, and fought anyway. If she could do that, after everything she carried, what was his excuse? That night, his grandmother sat with him at the kitchen table. "Baby, you listening?" Ruth's hands, worn and strong, covered his. "That woman don't define you. Her hate don't define you. You know what defines you? What, Grandma? What you do when people say you can't?" But if you think that moment was the turning point, wait until you see what came next. Jamal stopped talking in Mrs. Henderson's class, but he didn't stop working. Late at night, after his mother came home from her shifts, after his grandmother fell asleep with the TV on low, Jamal studied. He read every book the library had on engineering, architecture, mathematics. He taught himself algebra concepts that wouldn't be covered until high school. He sketched buildings with structural integrity. He researched from encyclopedia entries. He didn't do it for Mrs. Henderson anymore. He did it for himself. 8th grade came, new teachers, new classes, but the damage lingered like a scar that ached in cold weather. Jamal was quieter now, careful. He'd learned that showing his intelligence made him a target, so he became strategic. Excellent grades, but no flash. No raising his hand, no volunteering answers. Just quiet, relentless work. High school was different. Henderson Academy ended at 8th grade. Jamal tested into a magnet school across town. One bus transfer, 45 minutes each way. His mother couldn't afford the fees for advanced placement courses, but he scraped into them anyway on test scores alone. There, he met Mr. Bernard Thompson. Mr. Thompson was a black man in his 50s who taught physics and calculus. He'd grown up in Detroit, left for college, came back because he believed in the kids everyone else forgot. He saw Jamal immediately, not his clothes, not his circumstances, his mind. "You're doing college-level work," Mr. Thompson said one day, reviewing Jamal's test. "Who taught you this?" "Books," Jamal answered quietly. "Books." Mr. Thompson smiled. "You teach yourself?" Jamal nodded, waiting for the disbelief, waiting for the suspicion. Instead, Mr. Thompson asked, "What do you want to build?" No one had ever asked him that. Not like it was real. Not like it mattered. "Bridges," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Buildings that last. Structures that help people." "Then let's make sure you can." Mr. Thompson stayed after school 3 days a week, tutoring Jamal, helped him apply for scholarships, wrote recommendation letters, drove him to college tours at universities Jamal didn't even know existed. The University of Michigan accepted him with a full scholarship. Diane cried when the letter came. Ruth held Jamal's face in her hands and whispered, "Told you, baby, told you who you were." But college was brutal in ways Jamal hadn't expected. Not the coursework, he excelled there, but the isolation. Being one of 3 black students in his engineering program, professors who called on him less, study groups that formed without him, job fairs where recruiters' eyes slid past him to white students with worse grades. The old shame tried to creep back. The voice that sounded like Mrs. Henderson. "Kids like you need to focus on simpler goals." But Jamal had learned something in those years since 7th grade. Shame only wins if you feed it. He joined the National Society of Black Engineers, found community, mentors, people who understood that being brilliant while black meant fighting battles others never saw. He graduated top of his class, got a job at a prestigious firm in Chicago designing sustainable infrastructure, worked his way up, earned his master's degree at night, published papers, won awards. 10 years passed, then 15. Jamal became the person his 12-year-old self had dreamed of. But that 12-year-old self never left him. The boy with holes in his shoes still lived somewhere inside, still remembered what it felt like to be mocked for hoping. Then came the phone call. Detroit Public Schools was looking for a new principal for Henderson Academy. The school was struggling. Budget cuts, declining enrollment, standardized test scores in free fall. They needed someone who understood the community, someone with vision, someone who'd been there. Jamal's colleagues thought he was crazy. "You're walking away from a 6-figure salary to run a struggling middle school?" But it wasn't about money. It was about the kids sitting in classrooms right now, being told they weren't enough, being measured by their poverty instead of their potential. Just when it seemed Jamal had everything he'd fought for, something incredible happened. He said yes. First day, August 2018. Jamal stood in the parking lot of Henderson Academy, briefcase in hand, looking at the building he'd left 20 years ago. It looked smaller, tired. The playground equipment was rusted. The windows needed washing. The paint was peeling like old skin, but it was still standing. Inside, the hallways smelled the same. Floor wax and old books and the particular stuffiness of a building that had seen generations of children. Room 204 was still there. The principal's office was modest. Jamal spent the first week meeting teachers, reviewing files, learning where the school stood. Budget crisis, teacher burnout, students struggling, families barely hanging on in a city that had never fully recovered. It was overwhelming, but it was also familiar. He knew these kids because he'd been these kids. He started making changes, small ones at first, funding breakfast programs so no child learned hungry, creating a clothes closet with donations, run discreetly so no one was embarrassed, bringing in mentors from local businesses, connecting with the Black Engineers chapter at U of M to create a pipeline program. The teachers were skeptical, all except one who was openly hostile, Mrs. Patricia Henderson. She was 62 now, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, still teaching 7th grade English and math in room 204, still powerful in that small kingdom, still the teacher who decided which students had potential. She came to his office 3 weeks into the school year. "Principal Williams," she said, her voice carrying that same authoritative tone. "I need to discuss these new policies." She didn't recognize him. 20 years had changed the boy with holes in his shoes into a man in a tailored suit. The skinny 12-year-old was now 6'2" with shoulders that filled doorways. The frightened child was now the person who signed her paychecks. "Mrs. Henderson," Jamal said calmly, "please, sit." She sat, back straight, clearly prepared for battle. "This breakfast program is disrupting classroom time. Students are showing up late." "Students are showing up fed," Jamal interrupted gently. "Which is more important?" Her lips thinned. "And this mentorship program. You're pulling students out of class for 2 hours a week to meet professionals who look like them, who can show them what's possible. Principal Williams, I've taught here for 33 years. I know these children. I know this community. You've been here less than a month. I've been here my whole life." Something in his voice made her pause. Jamal leaned forward, hands folded on his desk. "I grew up 6 blocks from this school, Mrs. Henderson. Sat in these classrooms, walked these hallways." He watched recognition flicker, then die. She didn't remember. There had been so many poor black boys, so many she'd dismissed. "These students," he continued, "are capable of extraordinary things, every single one of them, but only if we believe in them first." "I believe in realistic expectations," Mrs. Henderson said stiffly. "False hope is cruel. I prepare my students for the world they'll actually face, a world where teachers tell them they're not enough." Silence dropped like a curtain. "Excuse me?" Jamal stood, walked to his window, looked out at the playground where he'd once hidden during recess. 20 years ago," he said quietly, "a boy stood in your classroom and said he wanted to be an engineer. You laughed. The class laughed. You told him kids like him needed simpler goals." He turned. "I was that boy, Mrs. Henderson." The color drained from her face. "You don't remember me. Why would you? I was just another poor kid in donated clothes, another statistic, another child you decided wasn't worth your time." Mrs. Henderson's hands gripped her armrests. I would never." "You did." Jamal's voice wasn't angry. It was sadder than anger. "You absolutely did. And you're still doing it. I've reviewed your grade distributions, your recommendations, the students you invest in versus the students you write off. It follows the same pattern. Wealth, appearance, zip codes. That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair." Jamal sat back down, looking at her directly. "It's not fair that children internalize shame because the adults meant to lift them up push them down instead. It's not fair that talent gets buried under poverty. It's not fair that a 12-year-old goes home crying because his teacher told him to stop dreaming." Tears formed in Mrs. Henderson's eyes, but Jamal wasn't sure if they were shame or just shock at being confronted. "So what now?" she whispered. "Are you firing me?" Jamal was quiet for a long moment. This was the moment he'd imagined, the revenge fantasy that had lived in the back of his mind for 2 decades. The scene where he had the power and she had none, where he could do to her what she'd done to him, humiliate her, dismiss her, make her feel small. But sitting there, looking at this woman who'd hurt him so deeply, Jamal felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, sadness. "No," he said finally. I'm not firing you. She looked up, confused. You're going to keep teaching, Jamal continued. But you're going to do it differently. You're going to attend bias training. You're going to work with our equity coordinator. You're going to examine why you see some students as capable and others as lost causes. And if I refuse, then you'll retire. But I don't think you'll refuse. Why not? Jamal leaned forward. Because I don't think you're a monster, Mrs. Henderson. I think you're human. I think you got tired. I think you saw so many kids struggle and convinced yourself that low expectations were kindness, that you were protecting us from disappointment. He paused. But you were wrong. And deep down, I think you know that. Mrs. Henderson sat there, trembling slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. God, I'm so sorry. I know. How did you, after everything, how did you become this? Jamal smiled, but it was bittersweet. My mother fought for me. My grandmother believed in me. A teacher named Mr. Thompson saw me, and I was stubborn enough to use your doubt as fuel instead of letting it become my ceiling. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. I want you to think about something, Mrs. Henderson. Think about all the students who sat in your classroom over 33 years. Think about the ones you dismissed, the ones you decided weren't worth the extra effort, the ones you laughed at. She was crying now, silently. Some of them made it anyway, like me, but some of them didn't. Some of them believed you when you said they weren't enough. Some of them are still carrying that shame, still hearing your voice when they try to hope. Jamal opened his office door. You can't undo that, but you can stop doing it. Starting today. Mrs. Henderson left his office a different person than she'd entered it. So what does all this mean for us today? This story isn't really about revenge. It's about the invisible wounds we carry and the systems that create them. Every day, in schools across America, children are being sorted, not by their potential, by their poverty, not by their intelligence, by their zip code, not by who they are, by what they wear, how they speak, where they come from. We call it education, but sometimes it's just organized inequality with a lesson plan. Jamal's story matters because it reveals something uncomfortable. How often we judge children before they even have a chance. How our biases about race and class shape who we believe in and who we write off. How teachers, people meant to open doors, sometimes become the very obstacles blocking them. The statistics are devastating. Black students are disciplined more harshly for the same infractions as white students. They're tracked into lower-level courses despite equal ability. They're labeled as at risk instead of at promise. They're told, explicitly and implicitly, that certain dreams aren't for them. And this isn't ancient history. This is happening right now in classrooms where children sit hoping someone will see them. But here's what the statistics don't capture: the weight of being dismissed, the particular pain of raising your hand with an answer and watching your teacher's eyes slide past you, the shame of wearing donated clothes and feeling like your poverty is a moral failing, the loneliness of being brilliant in a space that has decided you're not. That weight becomes part of you. For some kids, it crushes them. They stop trying, stop hoping, fulfill the low expectations set for them because fighting those expectations requires more strength than they have. For others, like Jamal, it becomes fuel. But here's the thing we need to understand. It shouldn't have to be fuel. Children shouldn't have to be extraordinarily resilient just to survive basic education. They shouldn't need superhuman determination just to be seen as human. The miracle isn't that Jamal succeeded. The miracle is that he survived. Think about all the dominoes that had to fall perfectly for him to make it. A mother who worked herself to exhaustion but still fought for him. A grandmother who filled their home with books and belief. A Mr. Thompson who showed up exactly when Jamal needed him most. A scholarship that covered not just tuition, but living expenses. Remove any one of those pieces, and this story ends differently. That's not a system working. That's a child winning the lottery. What about the kids who don't win? The ones whose mothers are too broken by poverty to fight? Whose grandmothers aren't there? Who never meet their Mr. Thompson? Who test well but can't afford the application fees for college? They don't get scripts written about them. They just disappear into the statistics we pretend not to see. And this is where Jamal's choice to return becomes profound. He could have stayed in Chicago, built his buildings, made his money, left Detroit and everything it represented in the past where it couldn't hurt him anymore. That's what we tell successful people to do: escape, transcend, leave the struggle behind. But Jamal understood something crucial. Individual success doesn't fix systemic failure. He could become the most successful engineer in the world, and Mrs. Henderson would still be in room 204 crushing the next generation of dreamers. He could build 1,000 bridges, and kids in Detroit would still be going to school hungry, still being told they weren't enough. So he went back, not to punish Mrs. Henderson, though he had every right to. Not to prove anything, though he had plenty to prove. He went back because the fight isn't just to survive a broken system. It's to fix it for the next child who walks through those doors. That's the part of the story that challenges us. Because most of us, when we're hurt, want justice that looks like revenge. We want the people who wronged us to suffer the way we suffered. We want them to feel small the way they made us feel small. Jamal had that opportunity, had all the power, could have humiliated Mrs. Henderson the way she'd humiliated him. Instead, he offered her redemption, not because she deserved it, but because the children in her classroom deserved a better teacher. That's the part that's hard to swallow, the part that feels unfair. Why should the person who caused harm get a chance to grow? Why should grace be extended to someone who showed none? Because transformation is more powerful than punishment. Mrs. Henderson fired would just be replaced by another teacher with the same biases. Mrs. Henderson transformed becomes someone who understands what her assumptions cost, who might catch herself before crushing the next Jamal, who might become the teacher who sees potential instead of poverty. That's generational change. That's how we break cycles instead of just surviving them. But let's be clear. This doesn't mean victims of harm owe their abusers forgiveness. Jamal didn't forgive Mrs. Henderson in that office. He offered her accountability and a path forward. That's different. Black children don't owe grace to the systems oppressing them. They shouldn't have to be perfect to be treated with dignity. They shouldn't have to prove their humanity to teachers who are supposed to nurture it. The burden of fixing broken systems shouldn't rest on the shoulders of the children those systems harmed. But here we are, and until those systems change, we need more Jamals. More people who survive and then return. More leaders who remember what it felt like to be dismissed and use that memory to make sure no one else feels that way. We need more Mr. Thompsons. Teachers who see past circumstances to potential, who stay late, who fight for scholarships, who believe in children the world has already written off. We need more Dianes. Parents who show up exhausted and fight anyway. Who tell their children they're brilliant even when the world says otherwise. Who model resilience without pretending it doesn't hurt. We need more Ruths, grandparents and elders who fill homes with books and belief, who remind children that poverty is a circumstance, not an identity, who hold faces in their hands and speak truth into futures that feel impossible. And yes, we need Mrs. Hendersons to wake up, to examine their biases, to understand that their assumptions have names and faces and futures attached, to realize that realistic expectations is sometimes just a comfortable way to say, I've given up on you. Because the truth is, we all carry biases. We all make assumptions. We all have Mrs. Henderson moments where we judge too quickly, assume too much, close doors we should keep open. The question isn't whether we've done harm. It's what we do when we realize we have. Before we wrap up, there's one final truth you need to hear. 3 years after that conversation, Henderson Academy was transformed. Test scores up, attendance up, college acceptance rates tripling. But more than that, the culture shifted. Students walked those hallways differently, heads higher, voices louder, dreams visible. Room 204 was different too. Mrs. Henderson was still there, still teaching, but something had broken open in her that day in Jamal's office. Something that couldn't be put back. She started learning, reading books on racial bias, attending workshops, having uncomfortable conversations with colleagues and with herself. Looking back at decades of teaching and seeing, really seeing, the patterns she'd created. It was painful work. Facing the harm you've done, even unintentionally, is one of the hardest things a person can do. Easier to make excuses, justify intentions, claim ignorance. But Mrs. Henderson chose differently. She began tracking which students she called on and why. Which students she praised versus criticized. Which students she recommended for advanced programs versus remedial help. The data was damning. Even after years of teaching, her biases were still active, subtle, subconscious, but real. So she changed. Started staying after school to tutor students she'd once written off. Learned their stories, their struggles, their brilliance. There was a girl named Tanisha. Brilliant at math, but always in worn clothes, always quiet. Mrs. Henderson's old self would have marked her as lacks confidence and moved on. Instead, she invested, pushed, advocated for Tanisha to skip ahead in math, helped her apply for enrichment programs. There was a boy named Deshaun, sharp-tongued, defensive, always ready for a fight. Mrs. Henderson's old self would have labeled him attitude problem and given up. Instead, she learned his story. Father incarcerated, mother working 2 jobs, him raising his little sister, getting her ready for school every morning, making sure she ate. His attitude was armor. Underneath was a kid scared and trying to survive. She worked with him, not against him, helped him channel that fire into leadership instead of letting it burn him up. Slowly, Room 204 became what it should have always been, a place where children were seen. Jamal watched this transformation with something between hope and grief. Hope because change is possible. Because people can grow, even people who've caused deep harm. Grief because of everyone who came before. The students in room 204 over 33 years who deserved this version of Mrs. Henderson, but got the other one instead. He thought about them often, wondered where they were, who they might have become if someone had believed in them. One day, Mrs. Henderson came to his office. "Principal Williams, Jamal, I need to tell you something." She was 70 now, planning to retire at the end of the year. "I see their faces. I remember names I thought I'd forgotten, and I'm so sorry." Jamal was quiet for a moment. "I know. How do you not hate me?" It was such a raw question, so vulnerable. Jamal thought back to that 12-year-old boy, the one who cried at the kitchen table, who ate lunch in the bathroom, who almost let shame become his ceiling. "I don't hate you," he said slowly, "because hate would mean you still have power over me, and you don't. Not anymore." He paused. "But more than that, I don't hate you because I understand something now that I didn't then. Hurt people hurt people. I don't know your story, Mrs. Henderson. I don't know what made you so ready to dismiss children who reminded you of something. But I know you're human, and humans can change." Mrs. Henderson wiped her eyes. "The work you've done these last 3 years," Jamal continued. "That's real. That matters. Those kids you're reaching now, you're giving them something you couldn't give me. And that's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be. We can't undo the past. We can only shape what comes next." Mrs. Henderson retired that June. On her last day, she gave Jamal something, a notebook, old, worn, the binding barely holding. "I found this," she said, "in old storage." Jamal opened it, his handwriting, 12 years old, sketches of bridges and buildings, math calculations, dreams rendered in pencil and hope. "You left it behind," Mrs. Henderson said. "That day after I humiliated you. You left it in the classroom. I put it in storage, forgot about it." She touched the cover gently. "But looking at it now, Jamal, this is extraordinary. A child did this. A child I told to dream smaller. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry for all of it. Jamal held the notebook. His 12-year-old self stared up at him from those pages. Still there, still dreaming. Thank you, he said quietly, for this, and for becoming who those kids needed you to be. After she left, Jamal sat in his office holding that old notebook. He thought about the arc of it all, the pain, the struggle, the moment when hate could have consumed him but didn't. The choice to return not for revenge but for redemption. Not his own, but for a system's, for a community's. He thought about his mother, who passed away 2 years earlier, having lived just long enough to see her son become principal of the school that once tried to break him. He thought about his grandmother, who'd told him at 12 years old, "What defines you is what you do when people say you can't." That one person's belief can change a life. That resilience is real, even when it shouldn't have to be. That returning to the place that hurt you isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. That transformation is always possible, even for people who've caused harm, if they're willing to do the work. That the fight isn't just to escape broken systems, but to fix them for everyone still trapped inside. That dignity isn't something that can be taken, only temporarily obscured. That poor black boys with holes in their shoes and dreams in their notebooks are capable of absolutely anything. That night, Jamal placed the old notebook on his bookshelf, next to his engineering degrees, his awards, his professional accolades. Because that 12-year-old boy was as much a part of his success as any of those achievements. Maybe more. That boy had survived being told he wasn't enough and decided to prove what enough really meant. That boy had carried shame and transformed it into purpose. That boy had dreamed of building bridges and ended up building something more important, a path for others to cross. The next morning, Jamal stood in the school courtyard as students arrived. He watched them pour through the gates, every shade of black and brown, every economic circumstance, every kind of struggle, but also every kind of brilliance, every kind of potential, every kind of dream. And he made them a silent promise that no child in this building would ever be dismissed for dreaming too big, that no teacher would get away with measuring students by their poverty instead of their potential, that every single child would know deeply and truly that they mattered. Not because of where they came from, but because of the limitless possibility of where they could go. There's something we don't talk about enough in stories like this. We celebrate the ones who make it, the Jamals who survive against all odds, who turn pain into power, who come back and change systems. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Jamal is the exception. For every story like his, there are 100 others that end differently. Kids with just as much potential, just as much brilliance, who didn't have a Mr. Thompson show up at the right moment, who didn't get the scholarship, whose mothers were too broken by poverty to fight, who believed the Mrs. Hendersons of the world when they said, "Kids like you need simpler goals." Those stories don't get told. They just become statistics about achievement gaps and dropout rates and incarceration pipelines. Numbers on a chart that politicians argue over and then forget. But they're real people, real dreams that died, real potential that got buried. And the question we have to ask ourselves is this: why do we accept a system where success requires miracles? Why is it remarkable that a poor black child became successful instead of expected? Why do we celebrate individual triumph without addressing systemic failure? Jamal's story is beautiful, inspiring, real, but it shouldn't be rare. Every child, every single one, deserves teachers who believe in them, schools that nurture them, systems that support them, communities that invest in them, not as charity, as basic human dignity. Because here's what Jamal understood that we all need to understand. Talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. There are kids right now, in classrooms across America, who have the capability to cure diseases, design sustainable cities, write transformative literature, lead movements, change the world. but they're sitting in underfunded schools with outdated textbooks and teachers who are burnt out because the system has failed everyone, students and educators alike. They're going home to neighborhoods where violence is survival, where poverty is inherited, where hope feels like a luxury they can't afford. They're being told in 1,000 subtle ways that they don't matter, that their dreams are too big, that kids like them should aim lower, stay small, accept less. And some of them will fight through it anyway, like Jamal did, but most won't. Not because they're not strong enough, but because strength shouldn't be the price of admission to a decent education. This is what Jamal fought for when he returned to Henderson Academy. Not just to help individual students, though that mattered, but to challenge the entire system that creates Mrs. Henderson's. The system that sorts children by zip codes and skin color and bank account balances. The system that calls it realistic expectations when it's really just giving up. The system that makes poverty feel like a moral failure instead of a policy choice. Because poverty is a policy choice. Every time we underfund schools in poor neighborhoods while funding schools in wealthy ones, that's a choice. Every time we pay teachers so little that talented people can't afford to stay in the profession, that's a choice. Every time we invest in prisons instead of prevention, in punishment instead of potential, that's a choice. We've chosen, as a society, to create the conditions that make stories like Jamal's necessary. And then we celebrate the survivors without changing what they had to survive. That has to stop. Mrs. Henderson's transformation matters because it shows that change is possible on an individual level. But individual change isn't enough. We need systemic transformation. We need to reimagine what education looks like when we actually value all children equally, when we invest in potential instead of sorting by privilege, when we measure success by how we lift up those at the bottom, not by how high those at the top can climb. This isn't about charity or sympathy. It's about justice. It's about recognizing that a society that wastes the brilliance of its most vulnerable children is a society that will eventually collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. Jamal's story gives us hope because it shows what's possible when someone refuses to be broken. But the real hope lies in creating a world where children don't have to be unbreakable to succeed. Where every child in room 204, and every classroom like it, walks in knowing they're seen, valued, capable. Where teachers like Mr. Thompson are the norm, not the exception. Where mothers like Diane don't have to work 3 jobs just to keep their brilliant children fed and hopeful. Where grandmothers like Ruth don't have to compensate for systems that have already given up. That's the world Jamal is building at Henderson Academy. One student at a time, one teacher at a time, one policy at a time. It's slow work, hard work, the kind of work that doesn't make headlines. But it's the work that matters. Because 20 years from now, there will be students who graduate from Henderson Academy and go on to do extraordinary things. And they won't have to overcome a teacher's cruelty to get there. They won't have to survive humiliation to prove their worth. They won't have to carry shame alongside their dreams. They'll just be able to be brilliant, the way every child should be allowed to be. That's Jamal's legacy. Not that he survived, but that he came back to make sure survival wasn't required. There's one more thing. That old notebook, the one Mrs. Henderson returned to him, Jamal didn't just put it on a shelf. He had it framed, open to a page where his 12-year-old self had sketched a bridge with these words underneath. Strong enough to hold everyone who needs to cross. He hung it in the main hallway of Henderson Academy, where every student walks past it every day. Underneath, he added a plaque. To every dreamer who was told to dream smaller, this school believes in you. Your circumstances are not your ceiling. Your potential is limitless. Dream big. We've got you. Students stop to read it, touch it, take pictures with it, because they see themselves in it. They see a kid who looked like them, who struggled like them, who was dismissed and doubted and hurt, and who became exactly who he said he would be, not despite the pain, not even because of it, but through the choice to transform it into purpose. That's the final lesson of Jamal's story. Pain is inevitable. Poverty, for too many, is still a reality. Injustice will find us, in small ways and large. But what we do with it, that's where our power lives. We can let it break us. We can let it harden us into bitterness and hate. Or we can let it crack us open into something bigger than we were before. We can survive and then return to make sure others don't just survive but thrive. We can transform our own wounds into the healing others need. We can become the teachers we needed, the leaders we searched for, the proof that what happened to us doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning. Jamal Williams was told at 12 years old that kids like him couldn't build bridges. 20 years later, he came back and built one anyway, not out of steel and concrete, but out of belief, investment, transformation, and hope. A bridge strong enough to hold every child who needs to cross from where they are to where they dream of being. And that bridge stands in room 204, in the hallways of Henderson Academy, in every student who now believes they matter. Because sometimes, the hardest stories to live through become the ones that heal us all. Not because the pain was worth it, but because we refused to let the pain be the end. We took it, transformed it, and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. That's not just Jamal's story. That's the story of every person who survived what should have destroyed them and chose to come back stronger, kinder, more determined to make sure no one else has to survive the same way. That's the story of resilience. That's the story of redemption. That's the story of us, at our very best. When we remember that every child with holes in their shoes might be the next engineer, doctor, teacher, leader, visionary, when we treat them that way from the start, when we build bridges instead of walls, when we invest in potential instead of sorting by privilege, when we believe in every dreamer, especially the ones the world has decided to overlook, that's when everything changes. That's when stories like Jamal's stop being exceptional and start being expected. That's when we've finally built the world that every child deserves. The 12-year-old version of Jamal would be proud of that world. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally be able to rest, knowing that no other child will have to carry the weight he carried. Knowing that every kid who walks through those doors will be told, from day one, you are brilliant. You are capable. You are enough. Now dream big. We've got you.